Hi, good evening. Welcome to the first Zoom event of FAN's 2024-25 season. I'm Lonnie Stonich, the Executive Director of FAN. We're a nonprofit that presents programming exploring human development across the lifespan. I'm honored to welcome you to tonight's conversation between Shalinee Sharma and Professor Angela Duckworth. Thanks for joining us. FAN's YouTube channel now has an archive of over 350 videos of past events, so be sure to subscribe to our channel to get updates when new recordings are posted. And now for some introductions. Angela Duckworth is the Rosalie and Egbert Chang Professor at the University of Pennsylvania, Faculty Co-Director of the Penn Wharton Behavior Change for Good Initiative, and founding Faculty Co-Director of Wharton People Analytics. She is also co-host of the podcast No Stupid Questions. A 2013 MacArthur Fellow, Angela has advised the World Bank, the NBA, and NFL teams, and Fortune 500 CEOs. Her TED Talk is among the most viewed of all time, and her book, Grit, The Power of Passion and Perseverance, is an international bestseller. FAN hosted Angela in 2012 and 2016, and we remain deeply grateful for her engagement with our organization. Joining her, Shalinee Sharma is a math expert and the CEO and co-founder of Zearn, a nonprofit educational organization behind the top-rated math learning platform used by 1 in 4 elementary school and 1 elementary schools, probably plural, and 1 million middle school students nationwide. At Zearn, Sharma and her team are committed to helping all kids believe that they are math kids. Her new book, Math Mind, The Simple Path to Loving Math, is a national bestseller. I think the first week out, if I'm not mistaken. The book debunks the myths that prevent individuals from learning and enjoying math and explains better, more intuitive ways to solve math problems that are both rigorous and accessible. Before co-founding Zearn in 2012, Shalinee spent more than a decade at Bain & Company, leading work for clients in various sectors, including technology and education. She has her MBA from Harvard Business School and her BA from Brown. A child of refugees, Sharma is passionate about universal access to an excellent education. And now let's welcome Shalinee Sharma and Angela Duckworth.
Hi, Shalinee. How are you?
Angela, so good. So good to be here. Thank you for hosting with me.
We're going to have to pretend to be in a formal relationship because we're secretly BFFs.
Exactly.
But I think we can do that for an hour. Okay. In that role, Shalinee, you know I love the book, Math Mind. And I think, I don't know what fans' records are like, but there has to be some record broken by the number of questions that were sent in along with the registrations for this webinar. So as a level setting, kind of question, like put us all on the same page. Some of us know a lot about math. There are lots of questions. Tell us what you want to tell us about the topic of the day.
Yeah, great. Well, I'd love to just end with the conclusion. So if folks stayed all the way to the end, I would share some really heartfelt remarks at the end. So I'm going to share them now, which is today there is just a lot of unnecessary stigma around mathematics, and there's essentially a label of math kids or who gets to do math. And the core is that the way we approach mathematics, and we don't always notice it, is we're asking the question, who can do math? And kids know we're asking that question, and so do adults. And that's not an experience that supports learning and exploration, creativity, curiosity. That's one that feels, very high stakes, very high stress. But there's another way we could approach teaching mathematics, which is, how do you learn math? And when we shift the question from who can learn math to the really actually important question for all of us, for all of our kids, for our country, which is, how do you teach math? That's where we can finally retire the label math kid and really approach math the way we approach reading, which is not just where our expectations are that all kids can read, but our hope deep in our hearts is that all kids are going to love it, that they're going to ignite their curiosity, their wonder, their love of knowledge. And math offers that too. We just really all haven't tapped into it yet. So that's how I hope we end. And along the journey, as we're talking, what I really want to offer folks are the steps that we've found along our way. And not to say we know all the steps, but several of the steps to get there. So there is a place where math is for everyone. It's full of enjoyment, curiosity, puzzle solving, dopamine. You're going to tell me it's not really dopamine, but
No,
good
it
feelings.
could be dopamine.
Good feelings in the brain.
Yeah.
And there are a series of steps, and that's what I hope we talk about.
Great. And, one of the things that I really like about the book is that it doesn't just have that conclusion, right? Oh, the simple path to learning math. All kids can not only learn math, but love math, which I think is a provocative thesis. I agree with it. But walk us through, you talk about the essentials. And so like, what are the keystones that we need to know about now? And then of course, there are more questions from there.
Yeah. So I begin the book with, which I'll hit really quickly, which is, when you talk about sort of this idea of loving math as evocative or unusual, that's not how we approach other subjects that we intend to pursue. One wouldn't expect that, somebody who, is a famous chef loves cooking. You'd be like, oh, yeah, of course you do. And so we expect love to be connected to passion and perseverance and grit. And yet in math, we think that you're just supposed to grit down your teeth and suffer. And that's obviously not going to work. But the reason we think that is that's our experience of mathematics, even for those who succeeded, because math is full of these myths. And so the beginning of the book, I really try to explode a series of myths. And the conclusion of that is just, of course you hated math, but that wasn't math. And then where I would love to kind of spend the time is the practical steps, the 4 methods, if you will, that are just the non-negotiables that make math rigorous, accessible, enjoyable, and really just fill you with wonder. And so the first is actually belief, right? So if you engage in any activity, you need to have adults supporting you that believe that you can succeed and feel a sense of belonging. So like sort of this belief belonging. The second is you actually have to understand math, not memorize it. So imagine if you took a reading test and you memorized 200 words, but you didn't know how to read. And then a few weeks later, you forgot what you memorized, but with it, you forgot how to read. Reading would feel like the most stressful, tedious, hellish experience.
Reading would feel like math feels for many kids.
Reading would feel like middle school math. But look at how reading, we can put it all together and feel calm and confident because we can just, pick up a book and read it. So what if that was math? And that is math, by the way. It's just not how everyone gets to learn it. The third is what I would talk about would be adaptability. So there's this pervasive myth that if you get something wrong in math, it's because that math is too hard for you. Because math is just an IQ test. And so if you can't do it in a minute, another person can do it in a minute. So the problem's not for me. It's for somebody who's smarter. Well, what if instead it was that when you struggle with a problem, you just try a different way? And the children and adults who enjoy and pursue mathematics, they just stick with the problem. And then they just try it another way. And actually, it's not that they even feel frustration. They enjoy that.
Right. They almost, and maybe it's not even almost, I think they do enjoy not being able to get it the first time,
the
second time, the third time. And I will footnote this with research, which is that some people experience confusion as extremely aversive, but also in particular, it reduces their interest in a topic. And others experience that feeling of confusion, like, I don't know, I don't understand, and have the opposite, sort of like, I want to get into it, I'm more interested. And as you say, a lot of it is how it's framed, right? So what is the proper response to feeling confusion? So, okay, so that's number 3, right? That's kind of like, I'm taking notes, right? So kind of like an adaptability, like a kind of flexibility.
Adaptability, try another way, try a different way. That's part of the learning process. And that's actually the fun, and that the last is, there's going to require anyone to build a reading brain, to build a math brain, you have to practice a lot. And that practice can be drudgery. And in math, you think math practice, you picture a worksheet, 50 long division problems, you picture drudgery. But what if instead practice was fun? If it was filled with games, if it was, and games are filled with mathematics, like games we play all the time. But there is no shortcut to building those kind of neural connections in the brain to building the math brain. But there are children who get to do that and have fun. A lot of times when I talk to folks who talk about how much they love mathematics, they'll say, oh, when I was little, both my parents worked, so I sat with my grandfather and he played all these math games with me. You'll always hear some story of all of these games that these children got to play. And in those games, what they did was they built automaticity. They understood probabilities. They started to calculate percentages before they knew what percentages were, because in that was all the joy, but then they got to practice enough. And so I think these are the combined parts of building a math mind.
So those are the 4 non-negotiables, but now I want to begin at the beginning. So you began with the end, right? Like the take home is like all kids can love math. We can even retire that label math kids because it implies that some kids are not math kids. But I want to begin at the beginning just in the following sense. Like, who are you, right? Like Lonnie introduces you, being consultant, but who are you? There's so much of you in this book. I have a theory that when women write books, it's a theory, it's not a published study, but I have a theory that we tend to write in the first person and it tends to be deeply personal. Of course, men do too, but that certainly came out in Math Mind. So tell us a story about who you are.
Yeah, it's the journey of writing Math Mind and of building Zern is very much a story of, in some ways, like reliving my experience of in mathematics, like scraping by, barely holding on, trying to stay in this world of math, where I also, through my whole mathematics career, saw it in this binary way, right? I would sit by myself in 9th grade doing my homework, not being able to by myself do question 4 and say, okay, well, I guess I'm just not good enough for honors math. I'll call tomorrow, tomorrow morning, I'll go to the teacher and I'll drop out. That's what I'll do. It's like, because I can't do question 4.
I'm not a math kid.
I'm not a math kid. Nuts, right? Just sort of nuts. And, the studies Carol Dweck's done, and like that this persists. You have women who are at the top of their STEM careers still wondering whether or not they belong. And so I very much was that person. And I think so I'd start with saying it's deeply personal, the experience of trying to feel like I belong in the world of mathematics, and just noticing how much of our orientation to mathematics is actually asking the question, who can do math versus how do you teach math? I think founding Zearn and finding myself in the world of math teaching and learning was just a series of happy accidents. I was, working away at Bain.
Wait, before you get to the consulting and all that, because that is a turn. But how did you go from being a slightly insecure kid who didn't think she was a math kid to obviously, some kind of change of self-concept, right? Because it wasn't like 5 years ago you became math. I mean, this was a while. So take us back to like, what do you think, what happened?
So I think it begins in 6th grade. I had just transferred to a new middle school. It was a lot harder than I went to a very sweet elementary school. And we didn't do a lot of math, but it was really sweet.
It was fuzzy.
It was warm. And I got to middle school and there was mathematics expected. And I remember not having learned long division with a remainder. I remember that distinctly in 6th grade, and essentially being presented with pre-algebra concepts and thinking, and just kind of, floundering. And it was at that point that I decided, and, I did note that there was a group of boys who were, they were 6th grade boys. They probably meant no harm, but they were not necessarily very nice to the girls, and they were doing very well in math. There weren't that many girls in the class. It was an honors class. God knows how I got into it. And I decided at that point that I would just survive. I would survive this year, but I couldn't do any of this. And by luck, I did well on a test. Not like I didn't get an A, but I did better on a test. So not an objective measure of success, but better. And my math teacher an amazing, amazing teacher, called me over to his desk. And he said, if you try your very best, I'll never forget this. I was standing at his desk and he said, try your very best, you could be just as good as the boys. Kind of an eek thing to say to a little girl back then, but he didn't necessarily mean it the way we would understand it today in 2024. What he meant is you should not try to survive. You should succeed. You can do this. And it,
So he gave you the first non-negotiable. He gave you believe.
He believed
He gifted you belief.
Yeah. And, I still don't know why. I don't know what I could have possibly, now my guess is he called over all the children who were, I'm sure he did that but at the time I thought he called me over because something about whatever I had exhibited in that test showed him that I could do it. So I believed in the magic of it a little bit because I was a child. And so I thought, oh my gosh, I'm right at the precipice. This man is telling me that I can push. So I did. I pushed. And one of the things I really worked on was understanding, not memorizing. He was obsessed with understanding, not memorizing. And it allowed me to leapfrog a lot of what I had missed.
So he gave you the second non-negotiable, this amazing teacher. One of the award-winning math professors at my university, University of Pennsylvania, is named Nakia Rimmer. And he says, I don't teach math, I teach life. So, yet another reason that we don't want sixth graders to like walk out of a subject and think like, it's me. And I, for whatever reason, like can't do this. Okay. So I wanted to go back to when you were a little girl. And so now I can pick up the story because there's a groundswell of questions about Zern. And we haven't really talked about this transition to Zern and your story of that. But while telling us that, like, really tell us more about Zern as well. And I hope in the chat links will appear that are helpful for people who want specifically to know about either getting started with Zern or some question they have because they're already using it.
Yeah. Can I, right before I jump into Zern, can I tell you one more quick story about my teacher?
Yes,
please.
Okay,
I promise I'll come back to Zern. So I'll never forget, this is later in the school year, towards the back half of the school year. Once I was like engaged, working hard, trying my best. And it's not like, I always did well, but I was engaged as a learner. I wasn't just like surviving. And he was asking us a question and the whole class was like engaged as a community of learners and answering him and like, just a lot of banter. And he was like, you guys are just memorizing. You're not learning this. And we were like, no, we're learning. We're not just memorizing, we're learning. And he was like, let me tell you a story. And he told me a story, which I, later in life Googled, put in the book, but I needed to confirm it was true. But I'll never forget this story, which is the way he told it was, there was a company, A&W, and they competed against the Burger King, the McDonald's quarter pounder. They wanted to take out the McDonald's quarter pounder. And so what they put out was a burger that was a third pounder for less money and tasted better. And they ended up and it ended up being a spectacular business failure and essentially took out this company, A&W. They made a big bet on it. And the reason in the retrospective, when they asked folks why they didn't give the third pounder a try, is because the majority of people who were going to buy the third pounder versus the quarter pounder, they thought the third pounder was less meat. And so they thought they were just getting
3 is smaller than 4.
Because 3 is smaller than 4, rather than 1/3 of a whole being bigger than 1/4 of a whole. And what he would always tell us is that's the reason that America failed at fractions. And we missed out on the third pounder, which would have been more meat for less money, is because we memorized math. We didn't understand it. And so we'd always sort of tell us that was his cautionary tale of memorizing, which I loved. And it turned out to actually be true. Okay, back to Zern. So Zern is a nonprofit, and we have a math learning platform, as Lonnie shared, that lots of students in kindergarten through 5th grade, as well as 6th through 8th grade use across the country. And if you step up back big picture, Zearn's mission is to put numeracy in the same place that we have literacy. As you think about it, like the hopes of teachers and of parents are that all kids will love reading, and they're just flat expectations. Of course, they're going to be able to read, just flat expectations. And like with anger in their voice, if that wasn't true. And so it's way past that. It's hopes about sharing your favorite book, your favorite authors. It's like a lot of love. And the question for Zearn and the work we're working on is to put numeracy in that same spot. And so to have just a flat expectations that all kids will get to numeracy, which I will define for you as the minimum algebra completion. And in addition, that they will have love for it. And so that's the big work of Zearn. I'd love to sit back and sort of share more about Zearn's founding, but I just want to make sure if there was any other questions about Zearn. I also did want to note there are so many questions that came in about Zearn, and we will share links and for sure answer questions about Zearn. So I want to make sure we hit all those, but would love to just first hit the big picture questions to be inclusive.
I think that was helpful. Yeah, I do know what Zearn is. As you know, we recently completed research together. So that was helpful, I think, for those who are not yet acquainted with this platform, because I think when I didn't know what Zearn was, I was like, oh, like Khan Academy, but during school. That I think is a reasonable thing for somebody to wonder. It's like math online being taught for free. Can you just distinguish the difference between Zearn Math and Khan Academy?
Yeah. So there's lots of learning platforms that complement the great work of teachers to help students like learn and love math and really know the concepts deeply. What makes Zearn distinct is a couple things, but one is the kind of obsession with the pedagogical framework of concrete to pictorial to abstract, first brought to us by actually Maria Montessori, and then later solidified by Jerome Bruner. And the basic idea is that we exist in this concrete world. And so we really understand our concrete world around us. And when we learn new knowledge, it sinks into the brain if it connects to knowledge we have. So if we are going to learn something new and it's just hanging out all by itself, it's much harder for us to understand it and for us to retain it, let alone apply it in a new context going forward. But if we hook that learning onto something we already know, that allows that to happen. Well, what is it that we already know? Concrete world. We know it so well. So while 1/3 and 1/4 seems abstract, 1/3 of a cake versus 1/4 of a
The
cake.
glass is half full. I think it's a little more than half full, but if I drink some, it'll be half full.
Yeah. So we could get a bunch of 2 or 3-year-olds and they would know which was bigger, 1/3 of a cake or 1/4 of a cake instantly, because they know the concrete world. Then we could show them the abstract symbols and say, well, that part of the cake that you just tried to take, that's 1/3. So we can then use symbols to connect to their concrete world. So when we bring this into mathematics, we access what already makes sense to us, the concrete world, and we translate math into a way that begins from making sense. So in Zearn, from beginning to end, it doesn't matter if we're teaching the area of a circle, pi r squared, all the way to, counting, 6, 7, 8. It doesn't matter where we are in the sequence of learning. We're going to bring concrete, pictorial to abstract. So that's one big distinction. The second distinction is at the exact moment of struggle, that's when kids need help. If you wait to, if you sort of like, there are a set of learners who have the habits where they can kind of suffer through not understanding. So that is possible, but it's a smaller subset of learners. And so for a more inclusive set of learners, right when in the moment of, I don't know, that I don't know. If you provide children support right at that moment, it really gets them back into learning. I think one thing I always talk about is, you walk into math classrooms and it's like, making mistakes is how you learn, some poster like that. And all the kids are like, yeah, it's total BS. Making mistakes is how you get an F. Like, I know what happens when I make a mistake, I get punished. So you have these posters and those are lies. But what we want to create in Zearn is that that's true. And so when you make a mistake in Zearn, at the moment you make a mistake, that moment we open up learning.
What happens at that moment? And again, I think this is what I'm hearing you say is that there's really a deep pedagogical base to the Zearn iceberg. And maybe what we see at the tip is like, oh, these kids, you can see what's on their screen. So what is that moment then? And also I am going to bring us back again to, I think many people are familiar with Khan Academy. And I think you're telling me how Zearn is distinctive, but I think many people would still be like, oh, but like, is that not what Khan Academy does? So take me to that moment of struggle and then maybe help me, frame this.
So it varies, right? So, it varies based on where the learner is, but let's say you're watching a video, you're watching an interactive video, and, we just explained, I don't know, here's an interesting idea. What is a fraction bigger than 1? What is 8/4? Like, what even is that? So let's say there's a video that's explaining that. And we're going to do a check for understanding. And so let's say the check for understanding is we cut up 2 oranges and now we have 4/4 and another 4/4. And we ask you, what is that? 8/8, 8/4, 4/4. Like, we're going to ask you, do you know what's going on? And we get a wrong answer. Mm-hmm. At that moment, another 30-second video is going to open back up again to show you, okay, now others won't know, you won't kind of know that you just got that extra 30-second video, but it's at that check for understanding that we're going to say, okay, let's do that one more time. And perhaps in a new way to present that same idea, but in a new engaging way.
So what I'm hearing is that, like, when you're on Zearn and you are a kid in math class, you're being guided through this, from concrete to pictorial. By the way, I have 2 glasses, and if I filled them up, I guess there'd be 8/4 of water. But then to the pictorial, which I guess you would have like, more abstract, flat images, to the abstract, which is like 8/4, which is the same as 2, etc. So, right. So maybe with this personalized digital instruction, you're able to take kids through that. And then as soon as you detect that they're like a little bit off of the conceptual understanding, you're able to correct it. And is that not what Khan does? I mean, we don't have to belabor the point. I just think it's such a common, everybody knows what Khan Academy is. So just before we move on, I just wanted to make sure that was clear. Like, how is it in broad brushstrokes then different from what you would get on Khan Academy or other online, you're confused, click here software?
Yeah, I don't think I'm sufficient expert in all the other software to tell you, or even Khan Academy, but from what I know, there is not an attention to CPA in a similar way. So it's
concrete, pictorial, abstract.
Correct.
Yeah.
And further, when you get something wrong at that exact moment, the video is not going to adapt. You're not going to see a different video. So let's say I'm watching a Zearn video and I'm stumbling. I may end up seeing 6 or 7 minutes of video. Let's say you're flying through it. You may only see 2.5 minutes. So to my knowledge, there's no adaptivity in the instruction.
One of the things that I remember, I used to teach math, and I had some good habits. I don't think I had a 6th grade teacher like you did. So I had some good habits. I had a lot of bad habits. And I want to think about memorizing formulas together with you a little bit. So, tell me about your stance on kids memorizing formulas. Maybe you could give us a specific example and tell us what we may be doing wrong. And again, the more specific, the better, I think.
Yeah. So I love algorithms. In the book, I talk about like the history of algorithm and where does the word come from. And like nowadays we talk about, algorithms going viral, or we talk about content going viral. We don't talk about algorithms going viral, but algorithm and base 10 went viral in the 12th century. And so it's so cool, the history of algorithms. But one of the issues we have is we teach these algorithms, but we don't tell children why they work. So a simple example could be the most basic, second grade addition algorithm, where you're adding, let's say, 3-digit numbers or 2-digit numbers together, and you carry the one.
Yep.
And so children learn, they can execute doing it over and over. And then you present subtraction to them and they're baffled.
Right.
And it doesn't mean that they still don't need to practice and learn subtraction, but it's a sign that we haven't presented the principles of what's going on. And that's not letting them be full learners. Like I'll give you a simple example of a principle I didn't know until I started building Zearn with my teacher friends, which is, division of fractions, right? Or, so let's say you have
Like 1/4 divided by 1/2.
Yeah. So like or let's make it even simpler, 2 divided by 1/2, right? Like we'll do a whole number. So like, why do you divide by a fraction? Like, what does that even mean? Like, can you tell me a real world example? Okay, I have 2 giant cookies. They're just too big to give to children. So I'm going to divide them in half. Well, then how many pieces of cookies would I have? Well, I'd have 4.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like, oh my, and I remember like when I was my teacher friends were like, let's put a real world context in, like, what does 2 divided by 1/2? And I was like, let's not flip and multiply 4. I'm done next,
Right.
which is a great thing. It's a great way for adults to think, but children don't know what you're talking about. And when we don't tell them what we're talking about, some of them might think they don't need to know what we're talking about. Some of them might think they're not smart enough to know what we're talking about. And what a great way to extinguish curiosity for whatever they're making sense of. It's extinguishing curiosity. And it's actually so simple to explain why. So yes, I want children to know that 2 divided by 1/2, you flip and multiply. For sure, tell them that. How silly and how much nonsense to not tell them that. But with it, give them the gift of knowing why. Because then they'll never forget. And they'll be able to calculate efficiently.
My therapist said that to me once. I was like, what if I forget all this? She was like, you won't. And I was like, how do you know I won't? She was like, because you understand.
That's
and
right.
I was like, okay. And turns out, I think she's right. Until you walked me through that example, when you said 2 divide 1/2, immediately, like reflexively, and I'm sure I wasn't the only one, I was like, 2 divide by 1/2, slightly elevated heart rate. I was like, I remember that formula. You just flip the half, it's 2 times 2. And then I was relieved to feel like I got 4. But I think until you just walked me through that, and I'll confess that I think I'd need to be walked through it again and again, and like with more examples, and maybe from the concrete to the pictorial first to the abstract. It's like, oh, so I guess your problem with algorithms is that they are housed without whys.
Yeah, and there's no reason for that. There's no reason that, like, algorithms are fabulous. We should all learn them. They're original tech, right? Like when we created these algorithms, they were technology. They're original tech. They've lasted for millennia. They're so cool. But there's no reason it takes a minute to present the why with it. And when you can remember it, it increases your curiosity. Eventually you learn something meta. Everything has a why in mathematics.
Could it be, I think, I tried to take the center of gravity, so to speak, of the questions that were raised in the registration questions, and then also from, from my reading of the book, I have a question about systemic challenges to teaching math. But as a segue to that, from what we were just talking about, I mean, if I taught math, I do statistics for my job. I myself don't feel like I had enough of a why for that formula that I learned way back when. Is one of the systemic challenges to teaching math in this way, where it can be beautiful, where we can love it, where it can feel like a language, is one of the challenges that we all are, in a way, inheriting our mixed, kind of the good and the bad of our own math instruction.
Yeah, no question. I mean, I think that, and that's why I don't think that either Zearn or MathMind offer the final answer. It's just to start the conversation and sort of moving this forward. But, said another way, we are a bit of the blind leading the blind, right? Like where we don't have, I didn't learn math so that I knew the why behind all of the formulas and behind all of the rules I memorized. When did I learn? So do you know the proof of n times 0 equals 0? Can you prove it to me?
No.
Okay, so I couldn't either. And, I speak to all these folks who have like advanced STEM degrees like yourself, and n times 0 is 0, that. And I was talking to a mathematician who's a relative of mine, and he sort of was like, Shaw, it's just a convention, and I was like, it's not, it's not a convention. It's an axiom. So what is the axiom? I learned it when I think I might've been in my late 30s, and I shouted out loud with joy when I learned it. So, and we teach to 8-year-olds on Zearn. So this is the axiom. Let's say we have n, and let's make n for a minute 3, just so we can work with n, and then 0 remains 0. So 3 times 0 is 0. Okay, first let's start with 3 times 2. 3 plates. On each plate, we put 2 cookies. Okay, we have how many cookies? 6. Now, you eat 3 cookies, I eat 3 cookies. We're hungry. Now we still have 3 plates. And on all the plates, we have 0 cookies. And so in sum, 3 times 0 is 0. If we had 8 plates with 0 cookies, that would be 0. 100 plates with 0 cookies, that would be 0. N plates with 0 cookies is 0. And that, in fact, is the meaning of multiplication. The meaning of multiplication is the first is the number of groups, number of plates, and the second number is the number of items inside that group. Or if you think of it as rows and columns. So if you think of multiplication as a grid, just the beautiful area model. N times 0 is, you have, n rows, 3 rows, 8 rows,
No
100
columns.
rows, but there are no columns. So then there are no boxes. I shrieked with joy. How cool.
Do you think in today's economy, say one of the systemic challenges is that we kind of inherited this mixed bag, but frankly, maybe more bad than good for many of us in terms of our own math histories, our own math stories. Could some people say, well, the good thing is we have ChatGPT and we have Google and we have Excel, and maybe Shalinee's idea that all kids can be math numerate is not relevant anymore in today's economy. I mean, people are using ChatGPT to like program, right? Like, you can get it to code. So tell me your perspective on numeracy in a very rapidly changing AI, relevant economy.
Yeah. I mean, I'd say 2 things. I'd say it's more relevant. I mean, participation as AI brings forth like a world we really kind of don't understand, what's in front of us. Baseline numeracy is table stakes. It's more important. It already was, actually. You already look forward and look
Why can't you just Google everything? Or use a,
you won't know
AI bot.
You won't know what questions to put in. You won't know what to Google. So, and that's the second thing I was going to say, which is that doesn't mean that it's not a wonderful support. So, particularly when you tell a child, I'll tell you a great story, but when you tell a child implicitly or explicitly that they can know, you don't extinguish their curiosity. So when they're 8 years old, you tell them that 3 times 0 is 0 and why. And so you prove to them n times 0 is 0. Guess what? When they're 12 years old and you show them a parabola, ax squared plus bx plus c, they say, what does a do to the parabola? What does b do to the parabola? They demand to know. And guess what they do? They type it into Google. So what they get is questions and curiosity. And so a Google, a ChatGPT, a Zearn, a Khan Academy, these are phenomenal. They're phenomenal. They're going to equalize our chances to all learn and get exposed, but not unless we're curious. And numeracy is what generates that curiosity.
I love what you said, because I think math oftentimes is considered the subject that has answers, but it sounds like Shalinee Sharma thinks that math is the subject that gives you questions. And of course, that was a little bit of a softball because I could not agree with you more. I do want to ask you a kind of magic wand question, right? So, if you could wave a magic wand and transform math education into as perfect a system as you can imagine, what would it look like? What would you do?
Well, so is it like, can I wave the wand twice because I have the wand, or?
Yes.
How does this wand
You're
work?
like, what happens when you multiply by two magic wands? Yeah, you're in charge.
Okay. So what I would really, if I had a wand, what I would want is that children got exposure to the why. So 3 times 0 is 0, why. But then they got to have enough fun and play enough games to know their multiplication tables. So the way I would say it, the example I would give would be, let's say we were thinking about something we all feel like we understand better, which is ironic, like learning a musical instrument. By the way, none of us are musicians, but somehow we all know about it. So we can use
I'm glad we're breaking down stereotypes on this webinar. Like, no, I do not play piano, and she does not play violin.
Yes.
Okay, right. We are not musicians. Go on.
We're not musicians. But imagine if learning a musical instrument was just scales. All you do is scales, 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 scales. No melodies, no music theory, nothing. Just scales, scales, scales. So, okay, maybe then you could definitely do your scales, but you would have no passion, curiosity, or interest in the subject. Now, what if we did the inverse? 2 fingers pecking out melodies. You're just gonna never you can never progress because you don't actually have any technique. And so and you can think of this in sports. We can apply this metaphor in so many things. And it's the magic wand would be to apply that metaphor in mathematics, that there's no trade-off between, sort of learning the algorithms, memorizing, practicing enough in fun ways, and understanding. But unfortunately, I think in a lot of the conversations I end up in, there's an explicit or implicit trade-off. Well, how do we have enough time to teach them the why where they need to be memorizing? Or memorizing is so bad, it crushes the soul. And so all we'll do is tell them why. And both are very scary paths. Like, it really just is a both and. And then when I present the both and, well, where would we find the time? Okay, how can we then let's just, of course we have to have the time. It would be the same thing would be true in reading. The same thing would be true in playing the piano, playing the violin, playing soccer. There's a both and. So that would be my magic wand. I don't know if that's a double wave or not. You can.
I think that was good. Well, you said it was double because you want the why and the how. And I think you'll appreciate that Roberto Diaz, who's a Grammy award-winning musician. So yes, he does play a musical instrument, in his case, the viola. He's also the leader of Curtis, the music academy here in Philadelphia, that is roughly twice as competitive to be admitted to as Juilliard. And he says that before his student opens their case, they have to ask, what am I about to practice? And there's a lot of how at Curtis. There are a lot of hours of practice, right? But he says, before you open the case, you have to ask yourself what the why is. Like, what am I going to practice and why? So I think you're allowed to have 2 magic wands, one magic wand for how and one for why. How do we compare the United States to other countries that you may know about or have visited? Are we unique in having this, like, oh, it's got to be one or the other? Are other countries better at this than we are? Do they have 2 magic wands?
Yeah, so I got a chance to see math classrooms in Japan, and I've also gotten a chance to see math classrooms in Singapore. I've also separately seen math classrooms in the UK, but there I was not seeing sort of best in class. I would say and I've called you after both those trips, like I don't have words for how
you were speechless. You were like,
yeah. I don't have words for it, but I would say some of the most beautiful mathematics I've ever seen presented. I was in a inclusion classroom where students who had a variety of learning differences in a Singapore classroom in 3rd grade, and they were proving 1/2 equals base height. They had construction paper, scissors, they were safety scissors, and they were just going at it, proving 1/2 base height. And in the end, they, did some multiplication tables, then they actually were shown 1/2 base height. But I mean, just the expectations that these 8-year-olds would prove 1/2 base height, not just be shown, not just be
By the
handed.
way, that is the area of a triangle. Is that correct?
Oh yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like all any stirrings of math anxiety, I feel very empathic with the, the kids
I
were like, oh
apologize.
my God, maybe I'm
Yeah.
not a math kid.
The area of a triangle, 1/2 base
Yes.
height.
Yeah, but they were proving it and they were doing it with the concrete, right? Like they were probably taking pieces of paper and then like taking a, rectangle or something, cutting in half, or I don't know how else they were doing it.
They were taking squares, rectangles, cutting them in half, and proving. And just like I had that shriek of joy of realizing n times 0 is 0, you could see children telling other, like, 1/2 is base height, and you're like, 1/2 is base height. There's just joy. So that was amazing. 35-minute class they did that in. When I was in Japan, there were Japanese translators. In Singapore, the language of instruction is English. In Japan, it's Japanese. I'm not a speaker of Japanese. So there were translators standing next to us, telling us what was happening. But once we got into the mathematics, because everyone uses the same base 10, we were like, shh, because we could follow the whole mathematics lesson, though we spoke no Japanese. And I'll say they were like proving binomial theorem, which, was more like an advanced algebra concept. But just the automaticity. There was one point where the students were trying to figure out prime factorization for, I can't remember the number, but let's say it was, 42, 6, 7, 2, 3, 7. And I was like, oh, I don't know that as fast as you do. Just boom, they knew their prime factorization, and it'll let them have so much more fun to actually be in the problem. And I think in a lot of our classrooms, because there is an automaticity, kids aren't having fun.
My girls are now 22 and 21, but I will remember when they were growing up and going through the, public school system. I felt like, there was a lurching from, pedagogy that was all about the why. So my daughters would come home with like essays about what addition was. But then I would ask them like, well, if I have these 2 bananas and these 4 bananas, how many, but no idea, but they had written an essay about it. So we kind of lurched from why to how. Some years it would be just like drill, drill, drill. What are you doing? Well, you have to, do the diagonals or whatever. So I love that you awarded yourself 2 magic wands. This may be related to a recurring theme in some of the questions that I'm seeing here, which are about learning differences. What do you want to say about learning differences in the context of mathematics instruction?
Yeah, so the first is, I hope it is put here, otherwise I will throw in the link, but we have hopefully a good overview of how Zern supports students with learning differences that we can throw up here as a link. What I'd say is, like, the research on students with learning differences, there are a variety of supports required. And so I won't be able to get into all of them, but a key support is what we just talked about, concrete to pictorial to abstract. That is a key support for students with a variety of learning differences. Because what we do when we do CPA work is we provide children with lots of different access points, and we provide children with opportunities to express their mathematics in different ways. So for example, concretely, if we're still working on, let's say I've got a lot of things here. If we're still working on, we're in a younger grade and we're still working on understanding of 2 times 2, when we present it concretely, you can just count 1, 2, 3, 4. So you have another access point. And then you can get to the place where 2 times 2 is 4. But in the meantime, you can still participate. It's not the best example to provide, but you can see that, like, when we present things concrete to pictorial to abstract, what we do is we have multiple access points, and you're still in the game. You're still participating in the lesson, and you have your access point to participate in it. And it's not wrong. It is the access point, because 2 times 2 is 2 2s. And so there's nothing wrong with counting 1, 2, 3, 4. And so these are examples of a lot of times the pedagogy to support students with learning differences actually supports all of us better. We find this in,
But that's the general rule. I'm sure there are exceptions, but if we can instruct in the best way possible with the why and the how, giving kids a sense of belief, emphasizing understanding, but also understanding that practice requires hours and hours of practice. Would that in a way, maybe not completely, but in a very serious way address learning differences or not?
yeah, I mean, I would say, we struggle so much to support, if you will. I mean, there's a perspective which I think is reasonable that we all have learning differences. So there is that one perspective, we all learn differently. But if we say, okay, well, there's a general ed population that doesn't have learning differences, and then there's a special needs population that does, I'd say right now we serve all of our students so poorly. We're just not at the place where you see strong math scores, particularly post-pandemic. So kind of everyone needs a lot more help in math learning. And I think there's nowhere to go but up for all of our students, our gen ed students, as well as students who have learning differences.
Could we, since we're getting toward the end of the hour, get really practical? Like, what are tips? What are actionable tips? You can, suggest tips for educators, because there are a lot of them on this call. And can you also suggest tips, though, for parents?
Yeah, sure. So I'll share some
and that would be my last question, because I am sure Lonnie will appear very soon. Go ahead.
Yeah. So let me share really quickly tips for parents. For parents, I would say, push for understanding, like help your kids understand. That doesn't mean you should be your kid's math teacher. We did some pretty comprehensive surveys during the pandemic, and kids don't want you to be their math teacher, and you don't want to be your kid's math teacher. So let it go. Your child has a math teacher, work with them. But with your child, if they don't understand, get help. Ask your teacher for help, use online resources. And instead, at home, I would say, talk about math. Think about, we think about a reading home, one with books where family members are reading. You might have reading time. What's a numerate home? What's an enriched home? Play games, and think about all the mathematics that's in the world around you. And if your child does struggle in math, don't say, oh, we all sucked at math. That's just your destiny. Don't ever say it. You can have the thought and then do not say it under any condition whatsoever. So those are my tips for parents. With regard to teachers, what I would say is I think there are so many changes in the world of math these days. Like the notion of belief is like a view that math teachers have. And I think there are a lot of competing forces to push math to kind of one extreme or the other, the writing an essay or not having any clue what you're doing and why, and really push for that balance. That is what they are doing in Singapore. That is what they are doing in Japan. That is what the best performing schools are doing. And so really push for that balance of conceptual, procedural, and application.
Beautiful. I love that. And I will just say that when you started writing this book, I thought it was going to be, math literacy. And I thought, great, everybody needs to be numerate. But what really came out in the book was your personal story and a lot of love. Yeah, like shrieks of joy, stories about your two boys. And so I just want to say that if everybody listening to this could look at every kid and not think like you're either a math kid or not, but not even just think like, yeah, everybody can be, numerate in some kind of like eat your vegetables kind of way. But if we can, get to this vision of, loving math, then I think people might fly to the United States and like fly back, sort of open jawed, wondering like how to express in words what they saw. It seems like we're a long way from that, but I think that's a terrific vision. Well, I think Lonnie is going to show up soon. And so I'll not ask another question and turn the mic to you, Lonnie.
Thank you, Angela. As always, we're so grateful to you for always coming with the best and having always showing you whoever you're interviewing in their best light and being perceptive about their topic and lively. And we so value you as a human being, as a researcher, as
I'm a fan. You know, I'm a fan, Lonnie.
I
I'm
know.
super
Well, you can
fan of
say it one more time.
it might be recorded. I am a fan.
Might be recorded. Thank you so much. We appreciate your efforts tonight. I want to remind folks that Shalinee is going, excuse me. So sorry about that. Shalinee is going to be doing an after hours program with us. It's going to start at 8:05 p.m., which is in about 8 minutes from now. How do you get to come and spend 55 more minutes with Shalinee, asking her all the questions that you might have? Buy a copy of Math Mind from our bookseller, The Bookstall. The links have been in chat. Buy a copy, and Fan is going to, once everyone's at After Hours, Fan is going to gift a second copy of the book to everyone at After Hours. What a deal. So come hang out, ask your questions. I think we had, 79, 80 questions that were submitted via the Zoom registration form. So obviously hot topic in a lot of different directions. So I'm going to focus on maybe one thing. There's a couple directions I could take this, but I'm thinking a little bit, we just had David Yeager here, as you know, you may not know Angela, but we just had David Yeager here. We call it for the Yeager residency. He was here for 4 days. He did 2 public events and 7 private events. There you go. Right. Is it right behind him? There you go. Oh, look at that, kissing cousins. So David Yeager, what struck me, Shalinee, about some of what you're talking about in terms of kind of the cultural language about math, that math is boring, math is hard, math is too hard for girls, boys are better at math than girls, that the language surrounding describing math as torturous, something that you have to bear, and thinking about that language and thinking about a lot of what David Yeager had to say too about the cultural memes that surround adolescents and teenagers and how they're viewed as like, oh, I feel so bad for you. You have a 14, oh my, And so how the language surrounding, something in the world really affects how it's perpetuated. And I was wondering if you would maybe throw us, as we're walking out here, you got about a minute. Could you give us like one piece about how you feel people could even, just that quick little thing, how they could change how they talk about maybe math, maybe take it from the parent perspective especially when they see their kids struggle? What's something that maybe they could keep in mind?
Yeah. So I'd say a few things. The best things in life that you really end up loving are hard. And math is hard. And so, but give it a shot, like give it a second chance and then give it another one. And then the other thing I'd say is that math isn't so far away. So for example, our family we're hardcore Bills fans. And Josh Allen can run 40 yards in 4.76 seconds. That's a rate. And so the question is, can he run 100 yards? Like how fast can he run 100 yards? That's just football. That's just winning. That's the Bills winning. That's all that's happening. We're not actually talking about math and wondering if it's a linear function, but actually we are.
Yeah. And
so math isn't so far away. It's not so far away from you. It's not so far away from your family. It's actually all around you. And if you just take a moment and reject all of this nonsense of who gets to do math and who doesn't, you'll see it. It's all around you, and it's in the fun around you already. It could be cooking, it could be sports. It's actually all around you.
It's kind of like notice math.
Notice it. You already love it. You already have so much fun with it.
I love it. I love math. I started college as a math major, which is laughable because then I met actual math majors. I was not a math major anymore. Like, wow, you guys were really good at math. I was good at math until I met math majors.
You need a Shalinee 6th grade teacher.
That's right.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Angela. Great night. We're looking forward to the emergence at some point in several months. I won't say what, but you know what I'm talking about.
I do.
Okay. I guess. And Shalinee, we'll see you in about 5 minutes. Everyone, thank you for coming tonight. We'll see folks at After Hours. Thank you so much. Have a great night.